Hello and welcome to Insight. Today we have with us one of the most well-known strategic affairs analyst, Professor C. Mohan. Previously, he was the director of Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, where he is currently a visiting professor. Currently, he is also a senior fellow at Asia Society Policy Institute in New Delhi. Join us today as we discuss India-US relations in the light of the very successful trip that Prime Minister Modi has just concluded. So welcome to Insight. It really is a privilege for me to have you here, and also during this time where we've just seen the Prime Minister conclude his trip to the US. How do you view the success of this trip?
Look, I think the trip, is really one of the truly transformative moments in India's relationship with the United States. And since the United States is the most important power in the world, this I think marks a very definitive advance in India's overall international relations. Because if you look at last few years, India's trade with the United States has grown to $191 billion. It's the biggest trading partner. It is also an increasingly important technology partner. It is also a country where India has a very important, almost 5 million Indian diaspora, which is very successful, which runs technology companies, which is really in the upper reaches of the US political and administrative class. So I think it's really, so I think the visit in that sense really, by putting India's relationship with the US on a higher footing, it adds a lot of gravitas and weight, I think, to India's ability to navigate a more complex world that is emerging.
What do you think the major achievements have been in this trip?
Look, I think for a long time, we've been talking about, substantive defense cooperation. Not defense purely in terms of, exercises, but what India was looking for was more technology transfer. Because under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, we've been emphasizing how to get out of this unwanted tag of India as the biggest importing nation of arms to one of wanting to produce weapons at home. So I think one of the major agreements in the visit was to transfer technology for the production of a General Electric fighter jet engine. So that'll, that's really the beginning of a process where you would see India's ability to produce more weapons at home and increase the indigenous content of production of advanced weapons like fighter aircraft in India will significantly take off. So I think that is one major outcome. Two, I would say, related to defense is really finding ways to deepen collaboration in the new emerging and critical technologies. This way the agreement on having the US private sector to invest in India's new plans for producing semiconductors. So that is another major advance. And then there were a whole range of other areas like outer space, where India and US wants to do more things. India has signed these Artemis Accords, which lay out some broad rules for space cooperation. And US is going to train Indian astronauts. India is going to work with the US on a range of outer space missions. And then you have other issues like health, question of working together in the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific. So I think it's really, all in all, it's really very substantive, very solid outcome from the visit.
Do you think there's been a shift in foreign policy, the way India looks at the US and vice versa?
No,
and
countries
why?
don't change foreign policy overnight. I mean, India's been engaged with the US for almost 20 years. I mean, it was when Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee went to the US in '98, just after the nuclear test, talked about India and the US being natural allies. You had 2000, President Clinton came here. So it's almost 25 years of continuous engagement. I think over these 25 years, we've reduced our differences, we've overcome many of the old problems, generated more trust. That's one of the things Prime Minister Modi was emphasizing. There is much greater trust today. So that has allowed us to elevate this relationship. So these things don't happen overnight. And countries, It's not like foreign policy is not like socks. You can change every morning.
Quite
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Quite right. But how would you now see the relationship between India and the US? Some people have said it's like leader and ally. Some people have said it's becoming a relationship of equals. How do you view it?
Look, I think absolute equality doesn't exist in the international system. As in real life, everyone is slightly more richer, more powerful, more. So I think this idea that there's absolute equality, that's only in theory. But countries operate not on the basis of whether you're equal or not. What are your interests? If you're common interests, you work together. So if you say equality is the principal criterion, why would any of your neighbors work with you? So I think it's not a question of equality. Today, for the first time, I think our interests converge in a big way to have a stable Asia, to have a secure Indo-Pacific, and that in India and India's growth is in America's interest, and it is in India's interest to access American technology and other benefits that come with the relationship.
So with changing sort of geopolitics in terms of now you have the Russia-Ukraine war and India's played, a certain role or taken a certain stance. How do you think the US views its maybe perceived strategic autonomy?
Look, I think countries, again, we tend to obsess too much about strategic autonomy. Look, countries go on the basis of interest. There was no reference to Ukraine or Russia in the declaration. So US has interests in India. It's not just all about Ukraine. It's not just we deal only with one issue at a time. So I think it is a question of seeing where can you work together, and if you have common interests, common areas of convergence, you work on them. You try to minimize the differences that exist. I'm sure there are differences on Ukraine, how we see the issue. Then that doesn't mean you don't do anything else.
Quite right.
Otherwise, life, you don't do any business with anyone because nobody agrees with anybody else on 100% of all issues.
Correct. But also with the rise of countries like China or India, how do you see this whole argument between the unipolar world, maybe moving towards a multilateral world or minilateral?
Look, I think there was a time when we were worried about a unipolar world after the end of the Cold War. But today I think India's challenges don't come from the US, they come from China. China is sitting on our territory. We've had 4 major military crises in 2013, 2014, 2017, 2020. And China's position in the subcontinent, its support for Pakistan, its attempt to get bases in South Asia. So today you face a significant challenge from China. And the fact is the US also faces challenges from China. So there's one way, neither of us can afford to contain China. We're not talking about containment, but we want a balanced Asia. We want a multipolar Asia where all countries can live comfortably. That's whether it's Japan, India, Philippines, or Vietnam, or China. So I think the idea is to work together to produce a more balanced multipolar Asia.
Correct. But also we have some amount of partnership in the Quad as well on the Indo-Pacific. But I don't think everybody is on the same viewpoint of what the Indo-Pacific is.
No, that doesn't matter. You see, look, it's not by definition, look. We sit in the Quad. We're not arguing, look, where does Indo-Pacific begin and where does it end? India sees it as there's a larger Indian Ocean. The Americans initially said it's Hollywood to Bollywood. But today, if you see, one of the agreements in the summit was that India and the US will organize an Indian Ocean dialogue. So there is going to be greater focus on the Indian Ocean and not just the Pacific side. So that is India's perspective on that. The Americans have accepted that perspective.
So on the Quad as well, let me ask you another question, is that it wasn't really envisioned to be a security, sort of a base. But a lot of Indians view it.
No, look, I think, it's not, if people have hundreds of views, right? The governments are openly saying this is not a security alliance. So why should you disbelieve them? They're saying, look, we work together to produce vaccines. We want to work together on technologies. We want to work together on, assisting other countries in the region. So you have a Malabar exercise, right? Yes. Where we do military engagement with the US, the same 4 countries. So the Quad has been deliberately designed not to focus on military. It is focused on regional issues of interest to the entire region, so that everybody can benefit from that.
Correct. let me also then ask you India's position. Do you think India should find itself in a precarious position with everything that's happening in terms of even with Russia, we've had defense deals. Do you think that maybe our relationship with US would not be impacted, but our relationship with Russia would be?
Look, I think, countries keep changing their, friends and partners, expand one day. Look, Russia-China relationship affect you? Today, Russia and China were enemies one time.
Correct.
They're friends. That doesn't mean you stop talking to Russia. So you talk to Russia. So it is not that, everything depends on what one other country's relationship. So countries, big powers have relationship with everyone. India is a big country today. It's going to be the third largest economy. For all the problems with China, we also have a trade relationship with China. There's a lot of deficits. India has a problem. But you haven't stopped trading with China because you have a problem with China. So countries engage with each other. The question is today, if you say, where are your interests more convergent today? They're with the US, for example, on the economy. The US is the biggest trading partner. On technology, which is your major source, it is the United States. There was a time when, Russia was the most important partner for you in the Cold War. But today, trade with Russia in 2021 was only $9 billion. Last year, because we bought a lot of oil, it has increased to $40 billion. So Russia is not an economic power. It is a military power, so we have a lot of cooperation with them. And then we also have some common interests in Asia. So you engage with everyone on the basis of common interests, not by saying, oh, I'm going to be equity with one and I only deal
one
with
over
one.
the other.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, well said. But US has also recently made a statement on Pakistan, in terms of its terror activities. What sort of collaboration do you think India and US can have on terrorism in Pakistan?
Look, I think the US has been very supportive on the question of terrorism. We do a lot of counter-terrorism cooperation. We do on homeland security. There is a lot of engagement. There's a lot of exchange of intelligence. So those kind of activities. And then the US has also been supportive of India in the UN Security Council on the Kashmir question. For example, when 2019 August, when India changed the constitutional status of Kashmir, it was China that took the issue up to the Security Council, and the United States and the other friends in the West, France and Britain, blocked it. So I think, unlike in the past where the US was seen as supportive of Pakistan, today on the question of Kashmir and terror, today it is solidly with India. That doesn't mean US won't have any relationship with Pakistan. China has a relationship with Pakistan. China and Pakistan say they're best friends. You have Russia now wants to sell arms to Pakistan. So Pakistan is not a small country that's not going to have a relationship with anybody else. But today I think most countries see India, which is economy is 10 times bigger than Pakistan's. So therefore they see a value in engaging India on its own merits.
Correct. What sort of a role do you think then has, all of these developments that have happened, what sort of a role has the Indian diaspora, which obviously commands a lot of attention in the US, has played to achieve this sort of understanding?
Look, I think Indian diaspora today is one of the largest in the world, depending on how you calculate it. I mean, it's close to 20 million people, Indians, and then there's a growing number of Indian tourists, Indian students going abroad, Indian businessmen working abroad. So I think India's global footprint of its people and its diaspora is growing. And most of it is really in the two places. One is in the Gulf, which is really expatriate labor, which goes there to work. Second area where most Indians are concentrated is in the English-speaking world. That is New Zealand, Australia, UK, US and Canada. These are the places where most Indians are. And these are large numbers of these people are, professionals. They get into their political system. They're reading businesses there. And if you say, look, where have Indians done the best? I mean, that's in the United States. I mean, that you see the maximum role in terms of how, because US is a country of immigrants. They have, Indians run, out to the top Fortune 500 companies. Indian CEOs are large. They are in the political class. The vice president is of Indian origin. You have congressmen and the state governments. There are a large number of Indians who work there. So I think this is a bridge, an important bridge, especially with the English-speaking world, where they're better integrated While in the Gulf, they go there to work, they work there, come back, they don't settle there. But I think it's really in the Western world that most Indians have settled down.
That is true. And my next question, you've answered a part of it, but let me put it in another way. Sometimes interests seem to be transient, case in point being the US in the Middle East, and now seems to be a lot more self-reliant. With their relationship with India now developing onto the next level, is it because of the values of, let's say, pluralism and democracy? Are these stronger values, or is it just need-based?
Look, I think values have their place in the international system. I mean, democracies tend to work closer, better understanding. But I think in the end, what matters are interests, and my sense is interests are like in the Cold War, India and the US had same values, but we couldn't work together. But today, I think the good thing today is that values are in sync, and as well as our interests are in sync, and that is the big change.
Finally, let me ask you: do you think we should be, should we approach the extended neighborhood from the lens of the US, where US seems to be? I don't know if you're.
Why would you come to your own neighborhood from the American perspective? You go to your neighborhood in your own perspective.
Correct.
The Americans have their interests because they're a global power. They have interests everywhere. So the question is, do our interests converge? So in the past, they did not converge. But today, in the Indian Ocean, in the various places today, as a distant power, they don't threaten our interests in this part of the world. So that's the basis on which we are working in the Indo-Pacific. That's the basis on which we work together is going to work together in the Indian Ocean. Earlier in the Middle East, we were on the opposite sides. But today we have the I2U2, which is India, Israel, United Arab Emirates and India working together. This is the first time in the Middle East we are working with the Americans. So I think the context has changed. There is a lot more convergence even within our neighborhood with the United States.
Correct. But would you say that the influence of the United States in the ASEAN countries has been decreasing, or in West Asia has been decreasing, and therefore that would have some impact on?
Look, I think it's not question of American influence is decreasing, but Chinese influence is growing. China is today, from a very poor country with no international presence, today is the second largest economy, and it's everywhere, whether it is in Latin America, whether it is in the South Pacific, whether it is in subcontinent, Africa, it's everywhere. Yeah. And I think that is inevitable. So I think the question today for us is, how do you cope with the rising Chinese presence in your neighborhood, which is creating complications for India's historic position. So now question is, how do you deal with that? On that issue, I think there is more convergence with the US today.
Finally, where do you see the future of this relationship? Do you see it, going to the next level, and if so, how?
No, I would say really the greatest progress is going to be on the business side. As we said, if you go back to 1990, India-US trade was on just about $5 billion. At the time, trade with Russia was more than trade with India, trade with the US. In 2000, there was an ambassador here who said, look, India-US trade was like chapati, flat at $20 billion. But today, it's, as I said, grown rapidly to $190 billion. And the expectation, I think the ambition is to take it to $500 billion. That is in the nearest future. And the fact is, if you saw President Biden and Prime Minister Modi sitting together with the senior businessmen of both the countries and telling them, look, we want you to work together. And that's why you saw Micron, which is a semiconductor company, is already investing in India. You're going to see a lot more activity. So I would say on business, on technology, and on defense, all three areas you're going to see more cooperation. And there is going to be also in education, in research. These are the areas that there was a conscious effort in this summit to increase that cooperation. So you're going to see more of that. Finally, it's money in terms of more business means more people will travel, more jobs will be. I think that's where the big transformation is about to unfold, I think.
This was supposed to be my last question, but I just want to ask you something out of personal interest. Is when you say semiconductors and all, and they're going to bring their manufacturing here, is that sort of intelligence sharing or
no, it's not that's production.
Technology sharing?
Yeah.
Going to help India produce its own?
That's what right now we're not producing anything.
We're not producing.
India is in the design of semiconductors, but we were not in the production side, which is concentrated in places like Taiwan, South Korea, China. So I think we'll start, because it's not an easy place to, first day you'll start producing everything. First is to, Micron is going to do assembly and testing. Then you have Foxconn and Vedanta are investing in another plant. So slowly in the next 15, 20 years, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here and taking the time out and giving us that overview on the India-US relation and the future of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting.
Thank you. As Professor C. Mohan said, that it is common interests and values that create big changes in strategic relations, irrespective of whether it is the India-US relationship or any other developing relationship. We need to think about the rising Chinese influence. Until next time, thank you for watching.